So hey everybody, it's Mike. Welcome back to the Z Motorsports Shop and Channel. We're going to be rebuilding the Garrett turbocharger here off of our 2006 Silverado 2500. This is the Garrett turbo just as it come out of the truck, so I have not stripped anything apart yet. The only thing I did do was I peened a mark on the turbine housing, scribed a line in the band clamp so I would know the orientation of where that goes. The center section, I peened 2 punch marks on it, 2 on the inner compressor housing and the outer compressor housing. That way all the lines, or all the reference marks should be lined up going back together. To start with, let's go ahead and get these coolant lines off. They are a 17 millimeter socket. And there's a good chance you're going to drip a few drops of coolant coming out. Hopefully, well not hopefully, you should have new seals for these coolant lines. You don't want to reuse those. They're kind of a one and done operation. Down here it looks like a 10 millimeter nut holding the lower bracket for the coolant line. Okay, moving along. After the coolant lines are removed, I think I'm going to remove the oil drain line here next. Only look like 12 millimeter, I'm guessing. The one socket I don't have out. And you can generally reuse these drain lines from what I gather. I went ahead and bought a new one just because I wasn't quite sure if it would get damaged on the way out or not. So I do have a new one sitting over there. Now, if you don't have one of these, I highly recommend making one. This is just a piece of key stock that I've made an extreme angle on, right down to a point, and then I've heated it up and case hardened it, surface hardened it. I use this a lot, and then I just put some heat shrink over it, but I've used this a lot for rebuilding 2-stroke engines back when I used to rebuild a lot of those. But it works great for getting in behind little components like this. Just like that, and that way you don't end up doing any damage to the surface, either surface actually. Now, another thing worth noting is there is a gasket that's on that will need to be cleaned off before reassembly. So you don't want to forget that. Make sure I'm going to go ahead and do it now before I do forget, because that would be terrible to go through all this work, put it all back together, just to find out you doubled up a gasket in a certain area, and now you've got an oil leak. Yeah, that come off pretty easy, so that's off good and clean. Okay, so let's go back upright with it. Get my spacers out of the way there now that I don't have that oil return line on there. Although it's actually still on the pedestal. So There we go. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's pull the compressor housing off. I don't recommend using impacts, air tools on aluminum parts unless you really know what the hell you're doing and you've got a good feel for your tools, because I've seen people just grabbing them and ripping them out, and what happens is the thread actually overruns, or excuse me, the fastener overruns the thread's ability to release the surface tension, and I've seen people just zip them out and pull threads right out of the aluminum casting. So unless you feel comfortable, you know what you're doing, I don't recommend doing that. Pull them apart by hand unless you feel comfortable. Like I said, I hate to see you damage threads and not be able to put it back together without having to repair them. And these are an 8mm 12-point. Okay, got them all off. Now, same thing, I'm going to use the same tool, this very acute angled, I don't want to call it chisel, I'll call it a separator. And it just pops down in there, and you can see it did not do any damage to either surface. It just gets right down in there and separates them. That actually doesn't look too bad inside. A little gummed up, but not bad. So that'll go off to the solvent tank for cleaning. There is an O-ring in here you'll want to remove. So there's an O-ring right down in here that you will want to remove and replace. Some people don't replace these from what I've read. I don't know. I look at it, if you're this far into it, do you really want to chance something for a few dollar O-ring? Okay, at this point we're ready to remove the compressor wheel. I believe this is like a 17mm. And the other one is a, can't remember what the other one is. I think that, if I remember right, that's like a 7/8. Which I think is odd that one side's SAE and the other side is metric. Yep, that side is 17mm on the turbine side. Now this is also left-hand thread, so keep that in mind. You're going to want to turn this counterclockwise to remove the, for hell's sakes. There we go. Okay, that actually is in pretty decent shape. So I'm going to set that aside on a towel. That'll go get cleaned after. Now you can't drive that out yet because you're still on the center section, there. But at this point, you can go ahead and remove the 4 8mm 12 points holding the compressor housing or backing plate, if you will, onto the center section. Again, if you don't feel comfortable using impacts or power tools, do it by hand. Now this does have an arrow pointing up already on the inner turbine housing here, but like I said, I went ahead and I pinged it up here on the housing as well. Okay, and there's your thrust with the compressor side bearing that come out with it. So there's your bearing. There's your thrust washer and your oil ring. So I'm going to set these aside. Then there's there again. This is the 270 degree wheel. Now keep in mind, when this goes back together, it has a certain way it's got to go back together. There's an oil ring. There's an oil hole here on the top of the center section where the oil line comes in. That has to, there's a hole on the oil or on the thrust washer that has to line up as well, because there's oil passages that come down through and lubricate it. If you put this in backwards, and you can put it in backwards, you won't get any oil to the turbo, to this thrust washer, and you will it'll be a short-lived turbo rebuild. Okay, at that point, I'm going to go ahead and take this band clamp off. It's an 11 millimeter. And it's sprung loose, which is nice. Well, part of it did. All right, let's grab. There we go. Now the whole thing is loose. Now keep in mind how that's orientated, because that's got to go back on the same way. The heat shield will sit over it like this, and this will go back over it. Okay, I'm going to grab a little bit of oil here and soak it down. Let that soak in for a few minutes. Let that soak in for a few minutes and we'll come back to it. Okay, so that's been soaking for a little bit. Let's take my separating tool, and it's just starting to open up a little bit. So now you want to be careful as you separate this. You want to keep spinning this turbine wheel on the shaft, because if you bind that at all, you can damage this. So you want to walk it off very evenly and take turns side to side, so that you don't put any undue stress on that shaft. And it's starting to move pretty decent, a little bit of time, so I've switched up to just a regular chisel. Roll it over and hold it while you don't forget the bottom there, and there it went. Don't forget the bottoms. Okay, and there's the center section removed. And there's a few vanes that are a little, they're all moving. I expected them to be worse than that, actually. Well, that there's pretty tight. That one's pretty tight. That one won't hardly move. Now, one thing I've noticed is they will move a little. All of them fairly close in here, but not the full throw. I'm thinking this might have something to do with kind of the way my son's been giving me a hard time about driving like an old man. I don't hot rod my vehicles, so in hindsight on these, that may not be a good thing. It may be a good idea, and I'm if you've had experience with this, let me know. But I'm thinking more and more that it might not be a bad idea to open these up occasionally, just to be able to get that unison ring to move through its full range and keep those vanes from gumming up. because I've got several of them here that, well, like that one there only moves a little bit before it catches. That one there barely moves. And that one's barely, so I've got about 3 of them here that are barely moving, and the other ones are fairly loose. Now there is some coking, there is some carbon buildup in here. It's not terrible, but let's go ahead and set that aside for a second and get this turbine wheel out of here. And now out should come the center section, the turbine side bearing. Yeah, that's pretty, if you look at that, that's pretty good. That's pretty coked up. I got a lot of carbon buildup in there. There's a lot of carbon buildup in there. So this is going to need to be cleaned quite vigorously. The unison ring. Oh, yeah, that unison ring is almost seized up solid. No, that is seized up solid. I can't move it. Yeah, I can't move that unison ring. So there's my problem right there. That's I didn't have a lack of performance really. Well, drivability, and I wasn't getting the P003A code that some people were getting when it goes into limp mode. I was just getting an occasional P2563 code, meaning the turbo vane sensor was not being satisfied correctly. And so when I was driving it, I'd put my scanner up and watch it, and my actual would lag way behind my desired under certain driving conditions. So that's what led me to think, okay, I might have some coking of the compressor, or the unison ring, and or the vanes. The vanes are, yeah, there's a few of them, like I said, but that ring, that unison ring is seized on there damn near solid. Well, I can't budge it by hand, so I'm going to say it's pretty much solid. So I'm going to go ahead and tear this part, tear the vanes out, this part, and get everything cleaned. I'm probably not going to record that. You don't necessarily need to see me cleaning that. I'm just going to use some mechanical means of cleaning everything. The unison ring itself, I'm not going to worry too much about because I have a new stainless steel one that's going back in. So I'm kind of glad I bought it now. It's also supposed to be a little bit more clearanced around the center section, but I am going to make sure I get in there and clean that center section well. And then I'm also going to tear the gear and the actuator assembly apart. So there's 2 things I forgot to do, and it got me thinking maybe that's why this was seized and I couldn't move it. The retaining ring here, and then the plug for the actuator, the linear actuator. Pull this retaining ring out, and then you thread a 6mm fastener in there and pull on it a little bit, and it actually came out pretty easily. Now the other side over here is the gear set where that rack for the linear actuator goes in, and that one also has a retaining ring and a plug. And when I pulled the retaining ring came right out, the plug not so easily. I had to get on it a little bit with some pliers and kind of work at it to get it pulled out. When I pulled it out, it is very gummed up. A lot of that's not just carbon. I mean, that's not just carbon. That's oil. So I'm thinking I might have an oil, an O-ring. I think they're a quad ring on these back in here that's leaking as well. So I went ahead and thought, okay, well, maybe that is why that unison ring, because I had pressure on this. Maybe that's why that unison ring wasn't turning. So I turned it back over and checked it, and sure enough, it's still seized on. It's seized on the inner diameter there. So I'm going to go ahead and just very gently pry that unison ring up. Yep, there it is. Well, it's still doesn't want to come off. So there's the unison ring up and off. All right, now this next step, from what I understand through some reading, people don't recommend doing, but personally, I'm not going to tear it all the way down this far and not pull this last gear apart. So I've been over here cleaning, knocking all the carbon and everything off of this, and chasing, basically knocking the casting, the flashing and the rough casting off. of that surface, so the new unison ring will fit on nice and move smoothly. So I've been doing all that, and I noticed there's some carbon underneath that actuator, as well as there was some sludge buildup inside. So I am going to go one step further and pop this out. And if you rotate it far enough, you can see there's a small roll pin. And I'm just trying to drive it out enough that it'll release. There we go. Okay, so you want to match this. The pin is going to sit in orientation. I'll put a scribe mark on it where that pin will basically sit, so I don't get it 180 degrees off. About like so. So there's the pin. All right, knock the roll pin the rest of the way out to get that out. Okay, and there's the gear, and it sits in that orientation like that. Shaft all cleaned up, decarboned. The gear set cleaned up, all the carbon knocked off of that. You're going to put a little bit of moly lube on the shaft. And insert it like so. I don't like reusing these spring pins, so I bought a new spring pin. Actually, I bought a package of them, but it's a 3mm by 26mm, I believe it is. So I've got a new spring pin here that's going to be going in. So I'll reorientate the gear in relation. If I can see the holes facing up. Holes facing up. Hard time seeing that. There we go. My marks are lined up. Okay. Okay, get her started. Okay, so I've got the turbine housing all cleaned up. I've chased the threads where the up pipes attach to the back side. So when I get the up pipes back in there, I don't need to fight with those. I went through and cleaned where the down pipe goes in, and I've actually test fit it to make sure that once this is mounted back in the vehicle that I don't have to fight that. It's a lot easier here to do bench, so I just test fitted it, make sure it moved around good and I can get the clamp on it. So that's all done. The vanes were cleaned. I've got a new stainless steel unison ring in there. I've got NICs on the surface that the vanes sit down on, and then I brushed a little bit on the back side of the unison ring, and the unison ring and the vanes are moving freely. I have also clearanced the inside here. This is where the unison ring was seized on, and so I took a rotary bit in a die grinder and a fine-tooth one with a flat end, and run it around this outside edge. To be honest with you, I'm really disappointed. I thought Garrett, I was surprised when I opened this up. I would have thought this would have had a CNC machined milled surface, you know, the casting and everything being what it is, and then they come in and machine this for the unison ring to sit in. I was surprised to find that it was just raw casting and very, very rough. So I think that's why this expanding at a different rate than the unison ring, I think, is what causes those to seize on there, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, so I went through and clearanced the flat plane as well as the vertical plane here. Test fit the unison ring on. It's got nice good clearance all the way around. Cleaned up everything there. Went through all the mating surfaces with a Roll-Lock Scotch-Brite disc and polished all them up. So I've test fit them back together. Once that was done, everything went through the solvent tank one last time for a good flooding and cleaning. Oh, I also almost forgot. I did pull the gear set apart. I know on the Duramax forums and stuff, a lot of people say not to mess with that. Personally, it seemed kind of senseless to me to be this far into it and leave one part untouched, not pull it apart and clean it, make sure everything's functioned properly. So I pulled it apart. I put some Moly lube inside on the shaft. I put it back in. I put the roll pin. I put a roll pin back in. I bought a package of these 3mm by 26mm spiral wound roll pins. On critical components, I don't like to reuse roll pins. I have used reused roll pins in the past, but on critical stuff, I like to put new ones in, and I really like the spiral wound ones. So I put a new roll pin in that, and now I'm getting ready to replace the quad ring on the piston on the rack here. So, and that also I got from McMaster Carr. So I'll leave links to those two packages in the description, because I don't believe you can buy those through GM or well, anywhere really for that matter. So I will leave links. Now this is one of those areas where on these this, I guess you'd call it a rack, it's gear that moves in and out with hydraulic pressure on the end, and as it pushes in and out, this rack here drives the spur gear for the gear set. They say not to disturb that, but again, I find it hard to be this far into it and not replace the components. And I'm glad, because now this quad ring didn't break, but it is not very pliable compared to the new ones. So I'm glad I opted to tear that apart and get, yeah, that one's the same way. It's not hard, but it's not very pliable. So there's those, get them out of the way. Now you want to be careful when you put these on that you don't roll them, meaning have them spiral wound as they're going around. And you can see, might be hard to tell in the video there, but you can see that actually does stand a little proud. You see the ruler rocking back and forth on it ever so slightly. So that O-ring, or quad ring rather, does stand slightly proud of the shaft, where the other one did not. So go ahead and put that one back down in. Okay, so both of those quad rings are in position. I'm going to apply a little Sil Glide to both of those. Those of you that follow me over on Garage Journal know that Sil Glide is one of my staples in this shop. Okay, and then Now, when you go to put this in, you want it land, you want to end up basically where this is centered. So in order to do that, you want to go to the beginning of the rack and slowly insert this, work it in slowly. I'm gonna put a little bit of silk light at the entrance of that bore as well. But you want to go to the beginning of the pitch, or excuse me, the beginning of the gear. Turn it ever so slightly till it starts going in. I'm going to hang it just barely off the side of the bench here. That's another thing. Before I started reassembly, as I disassembled everything, it went to the solvent tank. It came out of the solvent tank, went onto my other bench over here where I did the preliminary inspection, and then also all the cleaning. Then before that, this bench was wiped down. As everything come off the cleaning bench, it come over here, sitting over here, ready to go back together. I've seen people rebuild these things on garage floors, on plywood benches with everything you can imagine. It's going to only be as good as the effort that you put into it on anything for that matter. So take a few minutes, clean yourself a work area, and as things are going back together, make sure that they're clean. You have a lot higher success, or a lot higher chance of success if everything is clean when it's going back together than not. Okay, so it's just barely started there. So I'm going to pull that back just a little bit. There we go. So that first tooth is engaged. And roll it a little bit, or twist it a little bit as you're pushing in, and it'll help guide that quadring in. Okay, now you can see, I hope this shows up on video here, you can see where the gear is now meshed. So if I move this, you can see where it moves that rack. And basically I'm going full one direction, and I'm landing right on the last tooth. Full the other way to where it's just about ready to spit the piston back out. And I'm on the last tooth there. So I know I've got full range now. I think that's why people recommend not taking this apart, is because it's so easy to not put it back together or put it back together off a tooth, and then you're not going to have a vane system that is functioning properly. So now that we know that is back together, I'm going to kind of center it in the part there. Now I can got one of two things. I can go ahead and put the end together here and here, or I can wait until I get these two halves assembled. I think I'm going to wait and do that. Yeah, I think I'm going to wait and do that, because I don't want to put it together. I want to be able to move this just in case I've got to fine turn that lever in order to line up with the hole. So once I get to that point, I'm going to go ahead and grab the new O-ring out of the kit. And as I'm going in, I'm just taking one for one. I'm not as familiar with this turbo, so it's forcing me to be a little more cautious as I'm going back together. So I'm kind of pulling one part out and exchanging it one for one. Okay. Kind of like these O-ring tools for a couple reasons. Number one, they work great for putting things in, the O-rings in and not gouging them. Number two, you can actually use that almost like a little spoon or a little spatula to reach down inside and smear some Seal Glide around. So, okay, there's that one. The other one goes on this piston. I'm going to go ahead and replace that while I'm right here, so I don't forget mainly. So there's that one. Grab the other thick one out of the kit. And actually, just by looking at it over there now, I noticed that this kit actually come with new retaining rings, new snap rings, if you will. So we're going to go ahead and grab those and exchange those in position here, so they're on deck, if you will. And there, so those two are ready to go. I think at this point we're ready to get the thrust washer ready to go. So I'm going to grab this quad ring out of the kit. Now when I put O-rings and stuff down in a groove like this, I actually like to take a little bit of Seal Glide and put it in the groove first. Just a little bit, not too much, in a few spots. Then put the ring in, and that actually not only lubricates everything, but that does a really fantastic job of holding that ring, that O-ring or seal or whatever it is, holding it down into the groove. Then I'll take a little bit more and run around the surface. Okay, so that quad ring's ready now. Now the thrust washer can go on incorrectly. In the center section, you have an oil port. It directly lines up with the oil feed coming in here. So on the thrust washer, you have basically a blank side, and you have a side that has a hole with a groove running around it. That is where you want the oil hole. Or you want that to face the oil hole. So I just have a little bit of engine oil that's going to be flowing through this anyway. I'm going to take just a little bit of moly lube. And put on the thrust washer to kind of hold it there, or to place there before. Okay, now I'll take a little bit of moly lube again. And not much, just a little bit. Along with some oil. Okay. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and put this part together, because then I can put the compressor housing on once that's together. So let's put Alright, so that slipped right down into place. And we'll grab snap ring pliers. I always like to make sure those snap rings with a pick or something, make sure they're all the way in the groove. That one's good. Okay. So now I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize around the inside, around the surface here, and then assemble these two halves. So let me get the band clamp clean. That's one thing I didn't do. Let me clean the band clamp and everything. Ring, make sure you put your new ring, cast ring, oil control ring on right there. So once that's on in place, we're going to go ahead and drop a new bearing. On. All right, now we'll drop a new bearing on. New spacer. And the other new bearing. Okay. All right, now let's go ahead and put that into the center section. Just like that. Make sure there's no interferences. That cast ring popped right in there. Everything's good there. Okay, so now we're going to double check and make sure the pin is in place in the cast housing, as well as bingo, drops right on. Okay, crisis averted. So now let's pick up where we left off. Tighten this down. You want to be careful with this shaft. You don't damage it. I keep pulling up on it, make sure it spins freely. And I'm going to put a little bit more oil. Personally, I don't think you can put too much oil in these when you're putting them together. So yeah. And tighten it to 150. Okay. Back it off. And retort to 160. All right. So let's go ahead and put the spacer. Then the thrust washer. Now the housing for the compressor, you've got your O-ring that should already be in there. Here is your new ring, so I'm going to put a little bit of Moly lube on that. Well, just a little bit of oil. Now I like to find where the split is, and kind of, there we go, and kind of lay the split in and pull the other piece around to it. Now, marks go up, so everything's in alignment. Should be right there. I grabbed 4 new fasteners. Put a little bit of blue Loctite on those. And actually this has an arrow on it also pointing up. Let's go ahead, and these are a 8mm 12 point, same as what come out of it. Snug them ever so slightly. Make sure the housing's seated down evenly. And I believe these get torqued to 15. Nope, these are 12 foot-pounds. These get torqued to 12 foot-pounds. I'm already in inch-pounds. I'll just go to 144. Actually, I'm going to go to, yeah. I kind of like to go on a cross pattern, just make sure everything's pulled down evenly. Okay, so now that that part's done, we are going to stand this thing back upright. Actually pivot it around. Get my blocks here that I used. And put the compressor wheel on. So this is going to go, and this gets torqued to 10 foot-pounds. Or 120 inch-pounds. So the inside one again is 7/8. The outside one I believe is 17. Yep, 17 millimeter. And this is, again, a left-hand thread. So let's start that on there. Balance the housing and everything all at once here. There we go. Okay. Now spin it, make sure there's no interferences anywhere. Everything looking good there. Okay, I think before I go any further, I'm losing quite a bit of oil out of this hydraulic solenoid port here, so I'm going to go ahead and put that together. Actually, I guess we could go ahead and lay it down and put the compressor housing, the compressor housing on it. Now, the O-rings on these are quite large, so I think I might envelop the help. I don't know if this will be. Okay, it's not bad. Again, I kind of like to work it around so I'm not, it's not all twisted. So you can just run it around, and actually as you run it around it'll relax and unfurl if it is. Everything actually looks good. So I'm going to run a little bit of sill glide around it. Just so it doesn't roll it or try to grab it and tear it as the housing's going down over the inner housing. All right. My pin marks and pin marks. Impeller's still turning smoothly, no issues. And they're just seated. Okay, grab the last of the new screws, new fasteners. And these ones also get torqued to 12 foot-pounds. Okay, these, double check. Outer compressor housing, 12 foot-pounds. I think we'll torque it to about 110 first round. Okay, now we'll go up to 144. Sorry about that. Somewhere in there my camera battery died. So I've got the coolant lines all ready to go on here. And the banjo bolt. Just move that to the edge of the bench there to make sure I don't smash it against the preload the tubing. These are supposed to be 17 millimeter. Retaining nut. Had to double check and make sure I had the orientation correct. It sucked to get that all the way back together and go, oops. Okay, grab the torque wrench. These get torqued to 19 foot-pounds. Maybe I should have put that oil drain line on first, but I think I got enough room here. Okay. Now I did order a new drain tube. I wasn't quite sure what it was going to be like getting that other one out. Plus, wasn't sure whether it would be. Oh, you know what's funny? I thought I dented that, taking it out, but lo and behold, the new one's got the same matching dent. Upper and a lower, not two of the same. I ordered an upper and a lower, and they are different. So there's the upper one. I must have grabbed the lower one by mistake last go around. And these get torqued too. 15 foot-pounds on these ones. The banjo bolt gets tightened to 25. So there's a freshly rebuilt turbocharger off of the 2006 Duramax. So I appreciate you watching. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up, and I welcome the comments. Again, this is the first of these Garrett variable geometry turbochargers I've rebuilt. Not too bad of a job. On a 1 through 5, I'd probably give it a 2, maybe a 2.5. Not bad at all. Just got a couple things you need to watch for, but all in all, pretty easy. The hard part was get it off the truck. So again, thanks for watching.